Welcome everybody that is here. Welcome. I'm Jeff Huber. I'm the interim director of the School of Architecture. We're really happy to be able to bring back our lecture series in this pandemic era that we are in. COVID-19 is not going to stop us from bringing some great talent. And in fact, I think it's helped us to really attract and draw a great host of speakers for this spring. And with us here tonight is Christoph Reinhart. Dr. Reinhart will be introduced by Dr. Youssef here shortly, but we wanted to share this poster and again, welcome everybody. I'm hoping that we have folks from AI Fort Lauderdale, from the professional organizations around, as well as AIAS, NOMAS, our students, but we are excited this evening to bring back our lecture series this spring. And again, this semester we have Christopher Reinhart, we have Wolf Pre coming, we have Antoine Picon, Patrick Schumacher, as well as Daniel Adams. And so we're very excited to kick this spring's lecture series off today with Dr. Reinhart. And I, again, invite everybody to come to the future ones. We are going to be doing these through Zoom. They're all going to be virtual this semester, and they are going to be going ahead and being recorded. And so they're going to be offered on the YouTube channel. I think we're actually live streaming now on the YouTube channel, thanks to Professor Bolajan, as well as Dr. Youssef, and they're on our committee that have put together this semester's lecture series. So I'm really excited. And I also want to welcome all of the faculty. I know I've seen several faculty on and all of our students on. I'm looking forward to tonight's lecture. It's going to be, I know, a great one, as well as all the other ones this semester. But I'm going to go ahead and turn the show over to Dr. Youssef, if I may. I think we can have somebody start to manage the waiting room and bringing everybody in. And so I really appreciate everything that Dr. Youssef has done and bringing in Christoph Reinhart with us here this evening. And so Dr. Youssef, who is one of our newest faculty, who came in back in fall before pandemic, and I know Professor Bolajan coming in and in the spring when we all came into this pandemic, but we're really excited to have both of these new faculty members here and really supporting this lecture series and bringing this talent that we have coming this semester. Dr. Youssef, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Huber. Yes, if you want, yes, I would actually be more than happy and honored to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Christoph Reinhart, for today. And I will tell you a little bit of a background, why I came to know Dr. Reinhart, but I will start with the formal introduction. For all of you, Dr. Christoph Reinhart is a building scientist and architectural educator working in the field of sustainable building design and environmental modeling. At MIT, he is the director of the Building Technology Program and the head of the Sustainable Design Lab, an interdisciplinary group with grounding in architecture that develops design workflows, planning tools, and metrics to evaluate the environmental performance of buildings and neighborhoods. He's also a managing member at Solemma, a technology company, and Harvard University spinoff, as well as strategic development advisor for ampdwell, a solar mapping company and MIT spinoff. Products originating from SDL and Solemma, such as ClimateStudio, DIVA, DAYSIM, UMI, and other tools that I actually use in my research, and everyone uses who are my students today. DAYSIM, UMI, ALFA are all used in practice and education in over than 90 countries. Dr. Reinhart has authored over 140 peer-reviewed scientific articles, including 2 textbooks on daylighting and even 7 book chapters. His work has been recognized with various awards, among them the Fraunhofer Bessel Prize by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation 2018, the IBPSA-USA Distinguished Achievement Award 2016, a Star of Building in Science Award by Building for Change magazine 2013, and 7 Best Paper Awards. Dr. Reinhart is a physicist by training and holds a doctorate in architecture from the Technical University of Karlsruhe. Now, before giving the platform to Dr. Reinhart, I just want to tell everyone that it is my honor to meet and invite Dr. Reinhart, because if you speak on building performance and environmental performance, you have to know about Dr. Reinhart. He's a reference, a pioneer. And I remember in 2016, that award from IBPSA, I was actually there. He wasn't there, I was there. And they actually announced Dr. Reinhart to receive the award. And I was looking, I really wanted to see him at that conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. That's what I remember. And then in 2017, Acadia conference, which is a great prestigious conference, was held at MIT. And I was there at the lab, and then I wanted to see Dr. Reinhart. He wasn't there either. So it's my pleasure that I see him today virtually, but we are very lucky and honored to have you here, Dr. Reinhart. For any researcher and anyone interested in building environmental performance, you have to know about Dr. Reinhart and his achievements. I'm thankful and grateful for all of the tools and methods he developed that I use and I've been using for years in my research, and I ask all my students to use. So thank you so much for the great achievements in environmental research. And thank you so much. The platform is yours.
Let's see. Thank you, Charmaine. That was very kind. Humbling, and I'm sorry to say that I'm a guy that never shows up, so it seems. Well, I didn't know that I was getting this award in Salt Lake City, and I wasn't aware that you wanted to visit me. And it's a great pleasure for me to meet you now. It would have been wonderful. I was musing today after a snowstorm in Cambridge to visit you all and see you in person, not only for the obvious reasons of better weather, but also because I deeply enjoy talking with different schools of architecture and learn how you are actually using various tools in your curricula and what kind of impact these tools are having. So hopefully, I understand we have 15 minutes in the end for discussion. Feel by all means free to share what works, what doesn't work for you, because I think that's the only way, learning from you, how we can make the outcome of our work better. Within our lab, I just wanted to introduce the people who do the actual work. So as Charmaine mentioned, at MIT, I work with the Sustainable Design Lab. This is a group of us 1.5 years ago when we could still hike all together. And at the bottom, you see the various contributors over the years. We developed basically some of the foundational science for predicting resource efficiency in buildings and in cities, and try to translate them into metrics and tools that are usable. And these are the dear friends with whom for the last 10 years we've been working within the context of Solemma on the development of these various design tools that I've been talking about. And all of the ideas that I'm presenting are always a product of teamwork. Before I actually get started, when you're a scientist, you, after a while, obviously get used in your ways, and there are certain tools that you're good on and you keep on using them. But I think it's always useful to take a step back and just reflect. At MIT, we always pride ourselves to aim to work on the world's biggest problems, to see what leaders and what others say what the world's biggest problems are. And obviously, this is really well brought together in this quote from President Biden's address. We have just so many issues right now. Attack on truth and democracy, the virus, growing inequity, systemic racism, and the climate in crisis. And we always want to redirect our research and help to address the most prominent issues. So today I actually talk about mostly our work in relationship to a climate in crisis, the relationship between buildings and how we can overcome together this crisis. So the majority of my talk, since this is a School of Architecture, will be about our work on individual buildings. But the last 5 minutes or so, I'll also expand and talk about our work on cities and energy policy. And there I'll talk about some of our efforts to talk about growing inequity as well, and how we can make sure that as we make our building stock less carbon intensive, we make sure that we have the federal and state incentive programs in place, that this change happens across the building sector. So let's get it started. And I'm showing the next couple of slides because I feel, after reviewing this data, that it's worthwhile for every architect to know, for everybody to know. And I want to kind of implore with you that there's a sense of urgency right now. So what are just some simple facts? So if we trust the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, then if we want to keep global temperature rise under 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have, as a humanity, 580 gigatons of carbon left and 30 years. So that's our budget today. And then as architects, we're probably interested in the building stock. So right now, the building stock takes up about 40% of carbon emissions. We'll probably be the slowest to get net zero overall. If you look at the announcement, for example, from General Motors, the transportation sector, with cars not getting that old, is aiming for 2035 to be carbon neutral. So let's be generous and give us more than half of the carbon budget. So that might be a nice number for you to remember or put on a t-shirt. So we have 300 gigatons of carbon and 30 years left to make the building stock carbon neutral. So one complicating factor is, of course, that the building sector doesn't stay static. It doesn't remain static. Actually, the projections are that we're going to double the built area worldwide in the next 30 years. So that's a really hard problem. That might be good for architects. Basically, in the next 30 years, we're going to build as much as we built in the last 5,000 years. But at the same time, it's not clear that architects will be involved in all of these buildings. And of course, it makes our task even harder. So if you now just want to see, okay, if we do business as usual, which is a 1% renovation rate per year, and we slowly work towards better construction practices by 2050, then buildings are going to burn our whole budget for all of humanity. So really, a way going forward is very simple to think. We have to increase the renovation rate by 5%. So you should all try to always also become experts in how to renovate buildings. And we, on the research science side, have to find within 10 years, 9 years actually, systems to make all new buildings carbon neutral. So 5% renovation rate, carbon neutrality, that's the simple goal that we have for the building sector. And how do we get there? Well, let's first start maybe with, if you are the perspective of a building owner, how does a building owner get to net zero? Well, imagine you own this cute little uninsulated house in Boston. So there's a very simple way, and you should probably take it, that you can do tonight, which is effectively that you go all electric. So you start off by just replacing your air conditioning system with a heat pump, so you electrically heat and cool. And then you just sign up for a local green power system. That what happens then is your energy bill will go up from $3,500 to $6,000 a year, but your building effectively becomes carbon neutral. Now, when you follow that route, which energy policy is kind of pointing that way, you are really exporting the problem to the grid, because the grid has to become net zero as well. And what practically happens is that during cold hours in the year, our heat pumps are so inefficient that we have to, by a factor of 3 or 4, increase the capacity of the grid. So if we just take the simple way out, this is not going to work, because the grid won't be able to become carbon neutral and deal with these large variations. So owners need help, ideally from good contractors or architects, and there's this long, thorny road. You have to do a little more to your building than just call somebody to switch your air conditioning system. You have to add insulation, new buildings, weather stripping, heat pumps, PV, all these different systems together. And if afterwards you're still together with your spouse, because it's probably a major undertaking, then you've done your share, so to speak, towards carbon neutrality. So obviously, it's not that easy to go through this process nowadays. So I think we need to train every architect to know at least how to design for net zero ready buildings. And one of the tools and methods that you can use for that is computer-based building performance simulation. Fortunately, it's not me that's saying that. If you look at the latest document by the American Institute of Architects promoting Architect's Guide to Building Performance, there's a clear statement in the preamble: building performance simulation. It's not just a good idea, it's an essential part of building design. So what is actually building performance simulations? It's the computer-based attempt to model heat and mass flows in and around buildings. That doesn't sound very exciting, but it's very useful. Effectively, what it does, what it used to do, is that it allowed us to calculate how big is your boiler or how much energy does your building use. That doesn't tend to excite a lot of designers, but fortunately with modern technologies, we can actually do a lot more. We can effectively model the whole human experience in buildings. So we can, for an individual anywhere at any point nowadays, say, well, how thermally comfortable you are, how is your oral comfort, visual comfort, and we can basically, in high detail, control and design for more comfort and health in buildings. And at the same time, where we're getting smaller, we're also getting bigger, meaning that we can nowadays, and I show some of this model now, not just one building at a time, that's too slow, we can model a whole city at a time. And I'll talk about that in a bit. Of course, the field is not that new. It was started in the 70s, and companies have used this method in the past. Practically any LEED certified building needs building performance simulation. So we've always been interested into seeing, okay, a lot of people tell you, oh, I'm using these tools. Well, how efficiently are you using them actually? So 10 years ago, we did a survey, how fast time flies here, and we asked one of the 100 leading firms in the US and in Canada that we know use performance simulation. So, well, how often do the simulations that you pay for actually change your design? And we found that firms, which was a good result, that have in-house modeling have the better collaborative processes. So there was a higher chance of the simulation doing something actually than in the case when the design was finished and you just hired a consultant to post-rationalize what you have done. Unfortunately, when we did this again in 2018, 2 years ago, with one of the largest US architecture firms that has many awards for sustainability, we actually found that overall their perception was that the simulations didn't have enough of an impact. Maybe because the level of expectation was higher, but that's what we found. So we poked a little more, and we wanted to see, is there an interest in change actually? So we did another survey and basically asked the designers and the modeling experts in these firms, big American firms. So do you think you should be doing the daylighting analysis? And you know, yellow and orange always tends to be good news. So a lot of orange means there was an enthusiasm for the designers to do the daylighting analysis themselves. And there was a similar enthusiasm to do the energy analysis itself. So we felt now is the time, there's an interest in change. So what we did 2 years ago, we teamed up, we created this advisory group with 15 firms, some of them like KPF, HOK, and Gensler, you might know. These are some of the very large firms, but we also try to balance it out internationally with some of the larger Japanese firms, as well as lighting designers, smaller architecture firms, and manufacturers. And we've been working for 2 years with these firms with the pledge to say that in 5 years, meaning from now on in 3 years, all member firms should be able to conduct and interpret thermal and daylighting analysis by themselves. So after a year of developing various workflows, we came up a year ago with this tool called ClimateStudio that you can download from this website. It's a Rhino plugin, and all the blue dots show schools of architecture that use it right now for teaching. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our philosophy behind using this tool, but this is not a plug for a tool. Use any tool you want. I think it's more a framework for you to operate in. So what I wanted to do, since I'm talking to architecture students, was to show you these 8 steps. Hopefully a lot of them are familiar to you, but I would love to hear after the talk a little more about how you are dealing with these problems, what works, what doesn't work. And I just wanted to walk you through an example. So we have a 1 term where we teach daylighting and energy at MIT. It's the first year undergraduates students that shows architecture. So they're sophomores, and it's for the MArch incoming class. So I have 14 weeks to basically teach all of this, and this is a typical final product. So starting, with site selection and finding, this is actually work by Chris Allen and Alan Reinhardt, who worked on this last fall. So, I mean, site selection has obviously many dimensions. That's something where you cannot just go by walk score, but it's probably a good idea to just get a sense that when you pick a site, it's not so far out in the boonies that all the energy savings that you make are overcome by people driving there. The second part I recommend, so I think this is the core. This is just to make sure, this is, I think, the basic. I think everybody should know how to do this. So you start off using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. These workflows take all 20 minutes to half an hour. So I just want to press on you the ease and the necessity to do this. So if you want to design a building of a certain type, you should know how much energy a building like of this type in the US uses. So here you get basically an idea of what the base use is, and you can then define your goals. So in this case, maybe 44 kilowatt hour per square meter in a year, which is quite ambitious. And then you should look at climate. And of course, just about any school of architecture does this right now. Usually this ends up being like a wall of data that nobody can interpret. And I think it's incredibly important here to pick your message. So if you are, this is actually a site in Amarillo in Texas. So it's probably quite similar in climate to where FAU is. So what matters? Sun comes mostly from above. In the summer, you don't want the sun in the summer, so well-insulated roof. And then there's, of course, this iconic graph always that shows you that a south-facing facade gets more radiation in the winter than in the summer. So that's a good mix. So work with the sun, building faces south. Pretty simple concept. And then here, then we work towards play with massing models. And there I would always say, if you do massing, use daylighting, not necessarily energy. Energy is not a great form giver for a building, partly because our building materials have become so much better that you have a lot of choice there. But lighting, you don't have the choice. So here, typically, for example, there are 3 ideas: a box with an atrium, 3 small buildings, and this crescent building. And the data, in a way, speaks very quickly for itself that the crescent, apart from probably being more attractive, also has is fully daylit in terms of an area. But it has some problem with direct sunlight, 15% of the year, but it's better than the others. So here, it's a bit of a slam dunk to use this building for further analysis. And then they just tinkered around with the facade design, changing the vertical angles, pretty similar studies that you should probably do in Southern Florida. And then they basically, without compromising the daylight in significant ways, they managed to get rid of most of the unwanted direct sunlight. So pretty clear and quick study. And then the next step was to say, okay, well, how are people really going to feel in the building? So for that, you can zoom in. So if this is your building, I'm zooming in deeper and deeper. And then I get this little pizza slices. And the slice tells me when it's red, then most of the year when you look that way. So if I'm standing here and look towards the window, I'm experiencing glare. That's not shockingly surprising. If you are next to a curtain wall facade and you're with your nose to the facade, then when you look out, you probably have too much glare. But you see pretty quickly that where the furniture is located, so this is good for furniture layout and orientation, the glare is largely gone. And so in this case, when you sit here and watch this way here, you only have a couple of months in the year from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. when you have a glare problem. So you basically, for that whole building, covered glare and daylighting. Then we'll be moving on to electric lighting. There, I think it's key that you're the architect, that's your job. Figure out good products and place them in the building, making sure that it's aesthetically pleasing and hopefully energy efficient. with modern LEDs that has, of course, become simpler than ever. So then you are your HVAC engineer's best friend if you manage to keep your lighting power density down. So how much energy does your lighting system need? And what these first 6 steps are probably the bread and butter of any architect. Now moving over to energy, I would still say this type of very high level study is very easy to conduct. So in this case, they started off, this is the baseline building. This is a code compliant building in Texas. And already you save big time when you have a better lighting system because you save on cooling and on energy. And then some insulation, you tinker with the air intake, you play with the facade, and then you basically get under your low benchmark line. So these are kind of the big steps to take to make your building more efficient. And finally, you can do a quick photovoltaic analysis, put a couple of panels, actually in this case you only need. And then in terms of balancing, basically annual electricity production from solar and energy demand, this would give you nominally a net zero building. So is it really that easy? No, it's not. I mean, this is one term, 14 weeks, but what are we missing? We pretty quickly just assume very high construction standards for your facade and your envelope. You predict occupant behavior, which is notoriously difficult to predict. You make a lot of assumptions, and your HVAC heating and cooling model is quite simple. However, this gives you clearly a roadmap. And when you're designing such a building, it's not that you're sitting by yourself and you have to design a building. You have an HVAC engineer, you have a lighting designer, you have people that help you with that. But if you want to be overused word master builder, you should basically understand the large flows that go into and out of the building to define certain goals. And this is really the main part of this exercise here. So if that's fun and you want to work a little more, we actually made out of that MIT class a MOOC last year, and we ran it twice last year. It was great. We had 30,000 people in the class, and we will run it again this year, probably in late spring. And that's of course free. If you go to the edX site, you find it there. And if you want to do something tonight or you're bored now, we basically have this little web app called klimaplus.com that you can use with your on your smartphone that allows you to do the type of analysis that I just showed you just on a simple box. But we developed this because we wanted to have an impact in Africa and India, and we had thousands of people from India actually taking the class. So it's the same concept, only for smaller buildings. So I would call what we've done so far more bread and butter, and wanted to move on to kind of what's next, what are we working on now. And I especially like to highlight the work from Irmak Turan, who just graduated with a PhD from our program in August. And with her together and the MIT Real Estate Innovation Lab, we looked at basically these two parallel worlds of designers that use tools to make green buildings and investors that use their own tools. And I love this graph from Irmak. We basically wanted to bring the two worlds together and see how we can have our financial and our performance thinking more aligned. And one way of trying to do this as a first step was to just evaluate something like daylight that I just talked about. So how much are people willing to pay actually for daylight? What we did in this case, we had rent collected for 5,000 floors in Manhattan rental contracts. So we know quite a bit about these spaces and what people are paying. And then Irmak painfully developed this wonderful workflow that automatically does a full daylighting analysis of each of these workflows. And this is these are some of the results. Well, out of the batch, this shows you how many buildings in Manhattan of the buildings that we looked at have very low, low, high, and very high daylight. And it becomes pretty sparse at the top. So not surprisingly, in such a dense urban setting, there's not a lot of daylight around, which means this was good for our study because daylight is a true distinguisher. So it's intuitive that people would pay more here. When you actually apply this to an hedonic pricing model, which is something that the real estate sector uses to set the rent, for example, we found that everything else being equal, just having good access to daylight increases your rent by 6%. which is quite substantial. Comparing that to energy use, for example, typically your rent or your mortgage is 10 times higher than your energy prices. So if you have well daylight, that covers in value about half of the value of your energy costs. So that was the first part, just looking at daylight. We also wanted to understand a little better a question of view. And view is interesting because probably universally everybody thinks I want a building with a good view. It's valued in architecture, it's valued in real estate, but we don't know how to evaluate in the end, which is kind of surprising still. But we know there's a benefit of being able to, when we are in a building, to see objects outside. So in a way here, we kind of went a little backwards. We developed an architectural metric for view. And when we applied this to Manhattan, we wanted to see if we design that way, are people paying more for rent? It's kind of convoluted, but it's a first step. I would say the metric also makes sense as a design giver, but we haven't demonstrated that yet as a form giver. So how does it work? You basically place yourself somewhere in the building and you shoot rays in all directions to basically see what's out there. And then we get credits if you see landmark buildings, green spaces, ground, or surrounding waters. And then there's a percentage attached to that. And if it's above a certain value, then you have enough content to say, I call this a view. And in this image here, Irmak applied this to, I think it's 15 State Street in Lower Manhattan. So if you're standing right here, you see the Hudson, you see Lady Liberty, you see Battery Park, and some other buildings. So this would have a view. And if you basically repeat that analysis, then you have 24% of your area that has a view. And now we were interested, well, you don't need to have a view anywhere, but there probably has to be a certain minimum of view so that somebody that visits your space says, wow, this is great. That has a great view. I wanna rent here. And what we found is very similar to daylight for spaces that have more than 10% goods access to view has a 6% premium. So unfortunately, the two don't add up. So it's great if you have daylight or view, but people are already willing to pay for either view or daylight. But when you have both, I guess there's a maximum to what people are willing to pay. But of course, when you're in more dense urban settings, you can trade off one against the other. And it's a work in progress. Maybe some other work that we have been doing is now you have this beautiful daylit buildings. What do we do if nobody's in the building? That's a real bummer. And of course, this is changing, right? We have changing working patterns. The idea of being from 9 to 5 in your workplace is not attractive to a lot of people. After COVID, it's probably not enforceable anymore, and it's probably not even desirable in the first place. So we want to be able to, maybe as designers as well, think beyond the constraints of the buildings and see how we can at least impact our immediate environment as well. And there the keyword would be enhanced outdoor thermal comfort. So we studied this beautiful outdoor space, which is called the Susan Hockfield Court or the MIT North Court, which is very well used. And to orient yourself a little bit, this is the Geary Center by the Data Center by Frank Geary. This is the Koch Institute. These are actually public cafeterias, and there's ample of sitting both in the sun as well as in the shade. And we wanted to understand how people are using the space. So what we did is we had a weather station installed, and we put the SUFA Wi-Fi scanners out there. And had to go a little back and forth with our internal review board to be allowed to do that. What we effectively did, we collected this data. So kind of crash course in urban privacy. If your phone that you probably hold with you, if the Wi-Fi is on, what happens? Your phone is screaming in the world nonstop, I'm a phone, and this is my Mac ID. And actually quite a few shops are collecting that data. What you can do with this, you can basically pinpoint an individual if that individual comes back. We obviously encrypted the data and we threw it back afterwards, but we wanted to understand how individuals use a space. And so this is what we collected, a total of 30 million popes in 11 months, and then concentrated on the work days. We could actually this way identify what are people and what are is just urban infrastructure. And then we found that our North Court is visited by nearly 700,000 people a year. And we have 16,000 visitors. And we were particularly focused on these 16,000 regulars, because they have a choice. When you visit Cambridge and it snows, you're probably still going to come. But when you are living there, then you have the choice to sit outside or not. So that gave us, we knew when people are outside. Our next step then was to calculate outdoor comfort conditions. And that takes right now forever. So this is not fully ready for prime time, even though we're working on this. But what we did, that ran for 3 months, the simulations, we calculated for a whole year, for every hour of the year, for a 5x5 meter grid, how if people would ostensibly feel comfortable or not. And when we overlaid this information, thank God, after 2 years, we had some good results. This is work by Jay Dariva during his postdoc. We have this really beautiful curve that basically shows that we can predict very well when people are outside and if they are comfortable. So there's this very clearly defined peak. And that's really wonderful for all urban planners and designers. So you can probably expect in a year or so that we have some good tools that calculate this very quickly for you. And then you can just expand beyond your building and you can see when and how often people are going to be comfortable. And that means, where do you put the entrance? Where do you put the park bench? Where does the Starbucks go, right? Where do you have your bike sharing stations? We have some early indications that that is a trigger where the bike sharing station is located. That drives if people are taking this. So you can make a real meaningful difference to your surroundings. Before moving on to urban, this is my favorite graph from this study. What that basically shows you is how long people at MIT, just a little sidetrack, are having lunch. So if the weather is terrible, the mean lunch break is 8 minutes. And if it's divine, it's 12 minutes. It's a little sad, actually. So I wish for everybody to basically extend during good weather their lunch break. Okay, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about urban modeling as well, because it's such an exciting field, I feel. So what are we doing here? We're not modeling one building, we're modeling 10,000, 100,000 buildings. And for that, you need the same type of weather analysis as you did before. It gets a little more complicated if you want to map urban heat island effects and other issues. And then you need urban geometry, and that's the hardest part, you have to have reliable descriptions of the local building stock. Put these things together. The first time we did that was 4 years ago in Boston. You see here the GIS model, and then we basically auto-extract a building and its floors, and we have local zoning, so we know if this is an office or a residence, and then we do an energy model automatically of each building in the city. And then you get this basically maps that allow you to say for every hour in the year where energy is being used, and you can basically start designing a whole energy infrastructure around this. Or you can make the same type of predictions saying, well, how do we get to lower carbon use across the whole city? We've done this now for 4 or 5 larger cities, but we wanted to basically expand the number of people that can do this type of analysis. So this is our new toy. It's called UBEM.io. If you Google it, you'll find it. What it does, it makes it, when you have a GIS file, very simple to create an urban model. So it helps you to connect your GIS data to a template library, and then you get something like this, which is an urban model of the town of Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So we wanted to see how well this worked and if people are interested in that. So 2 weeks ago, we set up a workshop, which was really fun for 3 days. We had city representatives from Singapore, Florianopolis, Cairo, Braga, Kiel, Dublin, Middlebury, and Montreal all together. And basically in parallel, we talked about what challenges cities are facing that want to reduce their carbon reductions in meaningful ways, and how these type of tools can help them doing that. So just as a final flavor, I want to give you what can you do in a small town such as Oshkosh, Wisconsin. we basically started looking at, Energy Star upgrades. That's a home improvement program from the Department of Energy. So this is all off-the-shelf technology, efficient lighting, insulation, more efficient appliances, and a high-efficiency gas boiler. Or what I mentioned earlier, you do the same thing, but you electrify your building with a heat pump, and you could add PV. So how does this look like for a whole town? So we actually just presented that on Monday to the Sustainable Advisory Group of this town. And in 2007, their carbon inventory, and they had 262,000 tons of carbon. And then they said, by 2050, we want to be at 54. So last year, actually, the energy went in the wrong direction because it's just very hard to, as a city, to do something about how your citizens use carbon. So this is where we are today. How do we get from here to here? And so this is our calibrated model of the city. When everybody upgrades to Energy Star, you reduce by 28%. Oshkosh has a really dirty grid because they burn so much coal. So electrifying is actually not a good idea, at least today. So you have to basically cover the equivalent of half of your roof area with photovoltaics to get there. And I think just to bring what we said at the beginning home, this is a big lift. So, I mean, all these goals that everybody's throwing around, that doesn't come easy. That's a lot of effort that cities have to undergo. But how does the look? I mean, in the end, it's people that own homes that make this decision. So how does this look like? If you want to do an Energy Star upgrade in Wisconsin, in Oshkosh, you pay $8,500 cash. That includes incentive programs, and you get your money back in 5 to 9 years. So pretty decent compared to the stock. And you save a third of your carbon emissions. Now, if you want to also go solar, you put $26,000 on the table. Interesting, the payback time doesn't change so much because solar is so heavily subsidized, but you save 2/3 of your carbon emissions. So this is where we are right now, talking with various stakeholders from the federal government level in Congress down to the state level. How do we now make this more equitable? So how do we identify with this more simplified packaging of upgrades to building? How do we set up a program so that households that have lower income can quickly decide to opt into that and be supported? Having certain revolving bank loans to help with the $26,000 and so forth. So that's something that we are quite actively pursuing right now. So I'm done. Some final thoughts to convince you that architects should be trained today how to set up a zero energy building ready concept for their buildings. I showed some ideas on view metrics. We have also some work on circadian health. So I think we should all collectively, especially as designers, think about how do we make sure that our buildings are as comfortable and healthy as possible. And then just as a final remark, when you actually do this type of analysis, typically at the urban level, I didn't have time to talk about that tonight, but it's more than energy. Obviously, nobody's going to build a city around energy. It's all these different aspects from walkability, from outdoor comfort, from urban food productions that we should all take into account at the same time. And again, if you want to try this urban modeling interface that we developed is another Rhino plugin that looks at 6 or 7 different concerns all at the same time. With that, I thank you and I look forward to talking to you. I can stop sharing that we all see each other.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reinhart. I don't know, I have so many questions, but I want the students and other people to ask maybe first, because I follow up your research and your methods, but you're always very productive and very innovative. And now I need to look into your ClimateStudio for Rhino, which is a great tool. what we've been using so far, like in my teaching, I've been using tools that are for Rhino and Grasshopper environment, and I think your tool will be amazing because it has multiple metrics and multiple simulation, which is great. So I'm really thankful that you're here and you presented the tool, and now I'm going to jump into using your tool in my class. Hopefully.
Well, any tool, I use any tool, but use a tool. I mean, I want you to all make better buildings, but great. Anything?
Students?
Hello, I have a question regarding the app that you show us for the climate. What was the name again? Because I was trying to search.
Yeah,
for
it's the name of the app is Klima Plus. So you should be able to just type in one word klimaplus.com, and we had some issues with the URL, so it's going to redirect you to klimaplusbeta.com, and then you can use it.
All right.
But Klima Plus one word, or Klima Plus, CLIMA. PLUS. I think probably somebody can put it in there.
Thanks. The professor, I think, is shared on the chat. Thank you.
Right. Of course. Yeah, it's quick and easy. I mean, it's a good starting point.
Okay, there is a question in the chat. Maybe I'm going to read it out.
Okay.
Can we as architects learn from local indigenous builders a path to improve our day-to-day in sustainable construction? I have read that in Norway, there is a project that is used wood frame and local indigenous construction methods. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would deeply encourage everybody to talk as much to your contractors as you can, because I think that's always a missing component in architectural generation in general. And there's a wealth of information out there. Obviously, when you talk with your contractors, what works and what doesn't work. Now, specifically, different types of wood frame construction, that's, of course, a topic, what to build in that is on everybody's minds right now. I didn't talk about that tonight. We do some work of that, so do many groups, just the question of embodied energy. So when you look at the total carbon footprint of your building, how much carbon is embodied in what you're building. And they are being able to do various types of timber construction vis-a-vis concrete or steel has, of course, advantages. And the work from my colleague, Caitlin Muller from the Digital Structures Lab at MIT, she looks at various ways of reducing both the amount of material you use to build buildings as well as the embodied content. So yeah, great. We had just a PhD thesis on different types of laminated wood construction that can go beyond 4 stories. We have a question here. What are the most useful tools you use to reach net zero in your designs? Well, I mean, we're using what I showed you there is ClimateStudio, and these 15 different firms that I mentioned have rolled it out. So in the case of Gensler, KPF, and HOK, they have this set out on all of their firms, and we basically work with them on little design workflows, little quick that they can roll out so that all their architects are able to use this. Actually, what is very helpful, what is always, especially if you want to go into energy modeling, it's great if you are in a firm that has some energy modelers. So we encourage the energy modelers to set up the model. So everything about construction that you want to accomplish for a building is set up by the modeler, and then they kind of throw this template over the fence to the designer. And then if you start using the tools, you will see then you can start modeling away into everything about form and shape and so forth.
I have a quick question while you're talking. I was thinking, so Dr. Reinhart, when we teach students, like I teach students in the upper level, starting 3rd year in my environmental technology course, I start with the awareness, like similar to your lecture, which is great, like statistics and what do we need to do to catch up with the environmental challenges and the climate change consequences, and when do we need to get to net zero and carbon neutral buildings and all of that, so that they are kind of, they follow this mission that we're going to be a great architects with all the skills required for modeling the building performance. But I wonder, when is the time that you think we should teach those to architecture students, like third year, any year? And how well are we doing in architecture education in terms of those building performance simulation methods teaching?
I mean, I was a few years at the GSD and I'm now at MIT. In both cases, actually, I always have said should be the first thing first year. And in both cases, I got my will, I guess. And so we are teaching this first term. So it's sophomore year. The class that I taught you, the undergraduates are sophomore because at MIT, you declare your major in year 2. So it's a little sad, but they designed their first building with me. That's a scary thought since I'm a physicist. But at least the order that we use at MIT in building technology, we basically start form, so light and energy. I always say the building can float as long as it's efficient. And then in the second term, we introduce gravity. John Oxendorf is basically doing structures. And then in the third term, we have an integrated studio. I mean, like all NAB requirements, where we try to bring some of these concepts into focus. What's a real HVAC system? How do you design for humidity in the wall? And we just deepen these concepts. But I think sustainability is and has always been a great form giver. So doing this early, I think, is productive. I mean, you always have to see how it fits into your curriculum and how it's being echoed and reverberated in the studio. Is it possible to use CO2 in the atmosphere in construction? Yeah, I mean, there's a whole universe of work out there on innovative construction methods. There's some really interesting work coming out of the University of Washington, great databases that tell you the embodied carbon of various products. So yeah, I mean, I should say for architects, material choices is very engaging, and you are really the only one that makes a decision there. I mean, daylighting, lighting, and material choice, there's nobody that the architect really that picks what you want to use. So spending time familiarizing yourself with different both construction modes as well as material and finished choices is time well spent.
That's a great question. I guess I can follow up.
Yeah.
You know, there's the red list on materials that we have. Is there a list that actually is also pulled together to talk about the embodied energy that you're speccing in projects that you would recommend? Is there?
Yeah, there is. Let me see if I find that. The University of Washington has this great project. I think it's now even a private entity, and they have a database of different specs. I mean, overall, for embodied energy, you find better and better material specs. I don't do a lot about this, but I only hear good things about this. I mean, it's embodied energy is tricky. If you want to position it, typically we say if a building has a 75 to 80 year lifespan, then maybe 15% of the lifespan of a building, 20% of the total carbon emission come from the embodied part, and the operational energy trumps it. But of course, if we are talking here about net zero buildings, then in principle, the embodied energy is all the energy that is left, right? So if you go all that route, then it becomes very quickly more and more pertinent to look at that as well. There are a number of tools. There are these, there's Athena, there are, the math is pretty simple, right? You just need to know how much material you have. It's harder to know what the actual content of these different materials is.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Whenever there's silence, I come up with it. So how do you see, Dr. Reinhart, the future of using artificial intelligence methods to automate these building performance analysis for us so that we get automatic prediction and all of that. This cool stuff happening.
No, I agree. I think obviously our field is productively invaded by many new techniques from machine learning. You find that more and more in place. The artificial intelligence system, I think it's good. In our lab, we definitely have done some work again together with Kate and Miller on machine learning techniques. That becomes very productive in two applications. One is if you are a fan of parametric design. So then effectively what we are doing there, and if you're a fan of optimization, you know, these big complicated grasshopper files where you look at 2 million variants at the same time. There we've done a few papers where we basically use our physics-based energy plus model that we are providing and combining it with a machine learning algorithm from Professor Miller. And then you basically run 400 iterations, which then allow you to have a machine learned surrogate model of your building. And then you can run 20 million simulations of that building in 10 minutes. And basically you can create this enormous parametric spaces to optimize for it. So there, the sky's the limit. The time doesn't take so long. I think then the hardest part is for you as a designer to pick a good parametric space. And that's probably the hardest, because what do you do when the computer comes back with a solution and you don't like it? But I think later this term from Patrick Schumacher, I think you will learn a lot of this. And we have these discussions with them all the time. And then, I mean, artificial intelligence methods on top of that. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen or used it myself, but I think there's a lot of potential. We should definitely embrace all of them. I would leave no stone left unturned. There was some question about walkable or pedestrian methods. So yeah, what we are using is kind of a combination. Is you have to, if you want to walk, you need two things. You need actually paths that way you can work on that are safe, and then you need destinations. So we have this little grasshopper component in our UMI environment that mimics what walk-score used to be. So the way this works when we do walkable neighborhoods in our urban modeling class is then we download the GIS file with all local amenities, and then you put your building in, and then you see which kind of routes are attractive and which kind of routes do you want to foster more by having a new shopping center or restaurant and so forth. And then the next level on top of that would be that we are then doing this outdoor comfort analysis that I showed you earlier. That part is right now not for the faint of heart. These simulations take forever, but this is something where we use the bespoke surrogate modeling and other techniques right now to speed this up.
Fantastic lecture. I guess if we don't have any other questions, we really thank you, Dr. Reinhart, for coming in today and providing this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much for finally meeting you virtually.
I'm very self-conscious now.
Okay, thank you so
all.
much.
Feel free to reach out with an email. Hopefully you find this useful. Build those great buildings. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.